Well, good evening. Members of town meeting, I appreciate the chance to briefly introduce our FY 2015 budget and to provide some context for some of the items that we'll provide more detail on as the night proceeds. As you know, we spent a great deal of time in the past year taking stock of the Wellesley Public Schools, our successes, our challenges, and mapping out a vision vis-a-vis a strategic plan for the next 5 years. This plan was not only the result of tremendous community input, it was also the result of significant input by the higher education community and a great deal of interaction and dialogue with the private sector, particularly as we think about the kinds of knowledge, skills, competencies that our kids need to be successful in a world, as we all know, that's rapidly changing. So to this end, our strategic plan is comprised of 4 elements that I want to quickly review with you, and then I'll move to share some elements of our budget to show the alignment with that strategic plan. I'm pointing this way.
It is up on the screen, I think.
There we go. Okay. Oop. Let me go back. Good wait time in the classroom is about 7 seconds. It seems like an eternity. Okay, let's see if that stays. So, 4 strategies. They're all important, so they're all numbered number 1, apparently. The first one, not surprisingly, is about our kids, right? It's a focus on every classroom, every child in every classroom every day. And this reflects our belief that we can't be satisfied with the success of some students, even many students. We've got to be attentive to the needs, the success, the progress of all students, right? Combining our approach to wholesale education, having common systems, common curricula for kids, right, with supplementary efforts to meet kids wherever they are. And each year they come to us, different shapes and sizes, passions, interests, strengths, deficits. And our enormous challenge is to meet them wherever they are at that point and move them forward. And so I'll have some more words to say about that in just a second. So if the first strategy is about our kids, the second, not surprisingly, is about our teachers, the people who each day meet your children, the children of our community, in classrooms throughout Wellesley, and take up that mantle, take up that challenge to push kids. The third one is about the what, the content, what it is we teach. We've got an incredibly strong district. We want to be a world-class system, and we want to make sure that our content, our curriculum is calibrated with those changing expectations that are going to prepare kids for any number of options when they leave, college, career, and life. I'll have more to say about that in just a second as well. And then the last one is about resources, aligning our resources with our educational needs, seeking efficiencies to the earlier question, reinventing ourselves, sometimes selling old wine in new bottles, looking at positions, making sure that as a system, our resources are focused where our needs are greatest. Will this go faster if I hit the space bar? Didn't matter, okay. So let me start with strategy 1. Oh, okay. It's a slight delay here. So, talking about the kids, I think it's safe to say that no detail of our budget, no proposal of our budget has received more attention to our proposal to shift from our current hybrid kindergarten model or transitional kindergarten model to a full day kindergarten model. And you might ask yourselves, well, we're doing pretty well. Why change? This is the system we've known for some time in the Wellesley Public Schools. Why change? And I offer some data points that hopefully gives you some insight into our rationale for this. Number 1, when we look at our data, particularly for incoming first graders, those kids who have just left kindergarten entering into first grade, some pretty sobering statistics emerge. About 40% of our rising first graders enter 4th grade below proficiency in math benchmarks, 40%. About 20% of our incoming first graders enter below proficiency in literacy benchmarks. That's not good enough. It's not good enough for me. It shouldn't be good enough for you. You might ask yourself, well, don't they catch up quickly? Well, let's fast forward to the third grade when we, for the first time, have state MCAS results for our third graders. If you watched our presentation in October, more sobering details emerge. We see, for all students, some pretty good gains, but when we start breaking down those data for various subgroups of kids, we see, in some cases, 30 to 40 percentage point achievement gaps between and among groups of kids. And so some of those equity gaps that emerge in terms of kids' access to high-quality pre-K, to additional learning opportunities during those half days when they seek alternative enrichment opportunities, which we know are not available to all kids. These, in some cases, create persistent gaps that we're not able to close. That's a big part of the rationale for why we think we need to move forward with the full-day kindergarten. We're not alone in this regard. In fact, we're behind. About 90% of all kindergarten students in Massachusetts actually attend full-day kindergarten. So in Wellesley, we are absolutely an outlier in only offering a hybrid kindergarten model. It's nearly 90% of kids attend some sort of full-day kindergarten program currently in Massachusetts. The model that we're proposing would be 4 full days a week. Wednesday would still remain a half day, which is really important to us for professional development. The total new time added by moving to full-day kindergarten would be 163 hours. If you think about a 6.5-hour day, that's adding 25 additional days of instruction. You heard me right, 25 additional days of instruction. That's more than a month of additional instruction for our kindergarten students at a time when all research suggests those investments, creating that common, strong foundation for kids, puts them all on a trajectory for success. But this proposal isn't just about time. It's also about support. If you've ever been in a kindergarten class to see 22 5- and 6-year-olds moving around, it's exhausting. And to think that a single kindergarten teacher without support can manage those relationships, can manage that frenetic pace, can simply manage the physical environment of a classroom where kids are moving from water tables to small reading groups to play activities, both individually and groups, it's a real challenge. And so the cost of this proposal is actually borne in the support. We are proposing that in addition to moving to a full-day kindergarten model, we add 1 full-time teaching assistant for each of our expected 18 kindergarten sections going forward. So in each classroom, you'd have 1 teacher, 1 full-time teaching assistant to work in this full-day model. That's also the norm in most districts, and you'll hear when Casey comes up and see some further numbers on this. Even in places with half-time models, teaching assistants are the norm. So again, we're behind in Massachusetts, certainly, in supporting that program, and that's where the costs come in. The second item I want to focus on is right here at the high school, in this beautiful new building. Our house model is one that this school was actually designed to accommodate. If you've been around the school, you'll notice that there's a main office when you walk in those front doors to the right, but we have these stacked administrative suites in the center of the building, and the idea was to take the administrators, take support, and put it closer to where the kids are, in the center of the building, and it's beautifully designed to do that. As it stands right now, Wellesley High School has over 1,450 students today. We're expecting that to peak in approximately 2018 at just under 1,500 students. With only 2 assistant principals currently, that means each of those APs has more than a 700 student caseload at a time, based on every survey we've seen, for risk youth activities, stress environment. Kids need support. Kids need to be connected to adults, not just around academics, but around their social and emotional development when they need help. We want all kids to be known. We don't want to have any kids fall through the cracks, and yet for 2 assistant principals to each have more than 700 students, do the math. It's not good practice. And so moving to a house model, having 3 housemasters as opposed to 2 assistant principals, means we're obviously reducing that load to a great degree. Each housemaster would have approximately 480 students. That's not just good practice, it's common sense, I think, in thinking about connecting to our kids at a time when this is a very stressful environment with looming college applications, kids wanting to be successful as their time with us is leaving. It's a hugely important investment, not just in terms of the academics we know it will affect, but in terms of ensuring that social emotional development and those personal connections. The third item I want to mention, and I've picked this one in particular because I think it's representative of the kinds of capacity building we need, is around one position, an instructional data coordinator. And many of you know that I came from Texas prior to coming to Wellesley. It's an obvious connection, right? Texas and Wellesley. We had two expressions in Texas that I want to highlight. The first one is, in God we trust, everyone else bring data. And the second is, you don't fatten the cow by weighing it. And I want to talk about both of those. We have more data than ever before in public education. Every year, almost every month it seems, we have access to a new set of data, a new set of metrics, whether it's regarding student progress, student growth, or how many cartons of chocolate milk we sold yesterday, which, by the way, was 1,412, if you're curious. If you think about all of those data, though, for a teacher in the classroom, for the superintendent of schools, that can be very similar to an airline cockpit. Dials and gauges with data that may not inform anyone's practice without capacity to understand what those data mean. And so we think it's essential, as we meet the needs of every child, to be able to progress monitor our activities, to understand the impact of our programs, that we're incredibly attuned to the myriad of data that we have around our kids and our progress. And so having a single position for someone whose only job is to be dedicated to translating those data, making meaning of them, working with staff, working with all of us to help shape our practice, disseminating information, we think is absolutely vital to this particular strategy. Let me shift to strategy 2, which is our people, our educators. Oops. Let's see if this will work. Point it this way, okay. Point it toward Terry. Ladies and gentlemen, Hans Larson. Technical assist, thank you, Hans. Investing in our educators. So the research on this is so compelling, right? If there's a bedrock principle in education, this is it. There's no other factor that even comes close to the effect of a teacher in determining the success of a child. Nothing else comes close in terms of school-based determinants. And that's the reason, naturally, we place a premium on our ability to recruit and retain the very best educators for all of our students in the Wellesley Public Schools. The reality is, we live in an incredibly competitive marketplace for talent in the Metro West area, right? We're competing with the Westons, the Waylands, the Newtons, the Lexingtons. All are very close to us in terms of their proximity. And so having a competitive salary package is hugely important in allowing us to maintain our ability to recruit and retain those colleagues. One of our goals in our strategic plan is to remain within the top half of about a dozen or so districts in terms of competitive salaries at each of the levels. And I know, being here last night, listening to the concerns about steps and lanes, we're all anxious about that structure and its sustainability. There are a few things you need to know about this. Number one, steps and lanes have been around, a single salary schedule for teachers has been around for a long time. It actually started in 1921. I went back to some of my notes, having worked on this for a while. 1921, Denver and Des Moines were the two first cities in the United States that developed the single salary schedule. 30 years later, about 1950, 97% of every school in the United States employed a single salary schedule with steps and lanes, 97%. It's still like that today. So you look at more than 300 communities in Massachusetts, you will find this salary schedule, steps and lanes. There may be some slight nuanced differences, but it is common. And there were some good reasons to adopt steps and lanes, a single salary schedule. Number one, there were significant issues around gender disproportionality, inequities in pay. Men were being paid a lot more than women in terms of teachers. People were competing for different salaries. School people decided having a single salary schedule was actually the very best way to ensure parity and equity in terms of gender, in terms of assignment. It was far easier to administer, and things really haven't changed since. And so we've certainly begun that conversation with our colleagues here about alternative forms of compensation, and we're not alone. That conversation is happening around the country. Right? What are forms of compensation that allow us to fairly pay people, but also allow us to have sustainable structures over time, given the long-term liability around healthcare, particularly in retirement, among others, depending on where you live. So we're not alone in this. And we're very much aware of the challenges of that system, and yet Wellesley's not going to be the first to change that. We're certainly not going to do it in this budget, but you need to know that we've begun that conversation around what are alternatives to that system that allow us to do some of the very same things, recruit people, pay them well for their work, but that potentially are more sustainable over time. And so we hear your anxiety, and we absolutely are trying to be responsive to that going forward, but that's not going to change in the contract you're going to hear tonight. But I do want to mention a few pieces of that contract. You'll hear more from Casey in just a minute. Number one, it absolutely allows us to be competitive over the next 3 years, to be within that top half of districts in the Metro West area, about a dozen or so, as I mentioned. Equally important, this contract provides some key forms of support for our teachers moving forward. And I want to highlight just a few of those. Number one, this actually provides, for the first time, a formal mentoring program for our new teachers. Teaching is one of the few professions where your job day one is identical to your job year 30. You have the same expectations, you have the same class load. There's really nothing that's different. We don't have a sequenced entry. And so we've done our best over time to provide encouragement, to create informal relationships among colleagues, to share lesson plans, support one another, provide encouragement. And yet the research on this is so compelling given the high turnover of new teachers. Without formal mentoring programs, meaning trained mentors with specific assignments, dedicated time to work with each other, mentoring doesn't work. For the first time, this program provides that formality and resources to work with our brand new teachers. We're really excited about that, and it's something that's long overdue. Something else important in this contract, you probably have heard if you follow the news at all, there is a state mandate to implement a new teacher evaluation system in every school district in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This is a major sea change from where we've been in the past in terms of formal teacher evaluation, how those are structured over time. Those have tended to look similar. The interesting thing is Wellesley actually has had a fairly progressive, much more informative teacher evaluation system than most. Regardless, we are obligated under state statute to implement and meet new state teacher evaluation requirements that are really going to test the system. It's going to require more evaluations of teachers, shorter time but more frequent observations of teachers and administrators, much more documentation, using metrics for the first time. Student surveys are being folded into that as well. We're all being challenged to understand how to do this well. I should note, there's not a single new dime of money coming from the state for us to implement these programs. We bear the burden of implementing that particular mandate, and we want to do it well, and we don't want to approach this as an exercise in compliance with the state. Our goal is to provide the very best feedback to teachers for improvement. This contract actually makes investments in our administrators to do that work well. We've been fortunate to have such a collaborative relationship with the Wellesley Teachers Association to partner on navigating these difficult straits and to bring a new evaluation system online that is fair and, again, most importantly, provides the kind of feedback that our teachers need. Okay. It's funny, there's an interesting delay here on the laptop as well, so I apologize. So I've talked about the kids, I've talked about the teachers. Let me talk about the content for a moment. We want to be a world-class public school system. We want to have broad-based learning opportunities And I want to highlight a few particular areas that we're really excited about. As you know, last year, one of the areas that we immediately attended to was science. It's an area where our data are fairly compelling. We have work to do if we want to bring our efforts in science up to, for example, our work in writing, which we think is outstanding. This year, we've expanded that, right, not just to science, but to think about STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. In this budget, we are making significant investments in this new science sequence. For those of you who don't know, we're now teaching physics at the 9th grade as a 9th grade course. We've changed the sequence. What that will do eventually is free up the 12th grade to a number of advanced electives. Astronomy is the first advanced elective out of the queue as a result of that change. But it means K-12, we're revamping the entire science curriculum, making significant investments in materials, in curriculum, resources, training for teachers to be able to do this well, K-12. It's a hugely important endeavor for us, and we want to do it extremely well. And so this budget is going to provide us with those resources. We're doing the same in social studies. We've completed a multi-year review last year, curriculum review of the social studies areas, and so we're making significant investments in new curriculum materials, K-12 there as well. Our one-to-one program has probably gotten the, if kindergarten has gotten the most attention, one-to-one is probably number 2, gets the silver medal here in terms of public attention. So what is one-to-one? It's sometimes called the iPad initiative. It's not. One-to-one simply means one device per student. We happen to be using iPads now. That may change over time, could even change by grade level. For example, at the high school, where we actually think laptops may be more appropriate as the creation of content becomes more intense. We began pilot work at some of our elementary schools on a one-to-one environment that was very successful. The data suggested a great deal of progress for the teachers using those devices and, of course, for the students. This year, we have the one-to-one at every 5th grade across the Wellesley Public Schools, every child, one device. And what we're finding is extraordinary, right? One of our goals is to build responsible use of technology. Boy, do our kids know how to use technology for passive social media. They can text faster than you can talk. But we want to go from toy to tool, right? From passive social media to learning and productivity. We want to make sure that we're keeping up with kids and building their capacity to use some of this technology responsibly, as well as for their own learning. So if you were to go into a 5th grade classroom today, you might be in there for an hour and never see an iPad used once. And that's the point. A one-to-one environment means that technology is available when it's absolutely needed. And it means that kids in the very same class, even in the same cluster of 4 desks, can actually be working on different levels of assignments, some more advanced, right? Some that are more responsive to kids' challenges wherever they are. And so it's opening up a whole set of tools for teachers in a class of very diverse learners that we think is exciting. This budget allows us to make investments in the infrastructure to take that 5th grade work now to the 6th grade to come to the middle school. And we're going to be adding a year each year as we progress. And we've been piloting at the 6th grade with some students and teachers in preparation for that movement. The third and final one I want to mention is an elementary world language program. If you don't know, we don't begin teaching a second language in the Wellesley Public Schools until the 7th grade. And I have to tell you, going into some of those 7th grade classrooms, I'm amazed at how quickly kids are picking up the language. What that tells me, though, is imagine where they would be if they began that path in kindergarten, beginning to learn a second language. Where would they be by the time they got to 7th grade? If our goal is for every student in the Wellesley Public Schools to graduate fluent in 2 languages at the time of graduation, we've got to begin that work at the elementary school and not wait till 7th grade. This budget provides planning money to begin that shift over time, because this is going to be a much more challenging shift, frankly, than even implementing full-day kindergarten. Carving out the space for a new content area in a curriculum that doesn't have too many empty spaces, and providing that time is going to require careful planning in a sequenced approach over time. This budget gives us the resources to begin that process, or I should say to continue that process. We've already begun to do that. Fourth and final, I promise. Let's see. Not that final. Let's see. Did it come up? Okay. I was at a conference recently, and someone reminded me of an old expression at the Pentagon that a vision without resources is a hallucination. And the resources as part of this naturally are reflected in this budget, but resources themselves and our deployment of resources is also a strategy for us. First and foremost, you've heard a great deal about facilities, and we're making unprecedented investments in a long-term facilities master plan to attend to work that's been deferred for quite a while. The first out of the chute are Fisk and Schofield, with design work that is in progress. We hope to come back at special town meeting with construction funds and to begin that work in subsequent years. The work at Hardy, Honeywell, and Upham is far more complex, where we're hoping to engage the MSBA, the Massachusetts School Building Authority, in partnership to hopefully address some of that work going forward, given its complexity and its cost. So a number of the efforts around this strategy are reflected in those capital projects. Two that I want to highlight, though, that are actually reflected in this budget, and if you're a secondary parent, you probably know you get your checkbook out quite a bit. If you're a parent at the middle school and your child started track this week, you probably wrote a check for $150. I know I did, to begin that process. We ask our parents, in addition to paying taxes, supporting our operating budget, to actually assume a great deal of burden through user fees for any number of things, both athletic, but also in terms of day-to-day instruction. Don't have a laptop or not. Last year, we started taking back some of these fees and pulling them into our operating budget. Last year, we got workbooks in world languages that, believe it or not, we were charging parents for. This year, we're taking back industrial technology fees at the middle school as another element of progress, taking those costs back. And I'm very proud to say, for the first time in a long time, we're actually going to be paying for library books. It's something that we've been relying on our PTOs to support for a number of years. It's not been reflected in our operating budget, but it sure ought to be. And it is now for the first time at about $50,000. That's something that we've relied on the community to support. The bottom line here is we think that our budget ought to be a better, closer reflection of the true cost of public education in Wellesley, and we're going to continue to pull back some of those fees that do place a very high burden on the users in the system at that moment. I want to conclude, there's a welcome sentence, I want to conclude with words that I often think about. New York City Chancellor Joel Klein, when he left the helm of New York City, 1.1 million students, can you imagine? He was asked to reflect on his tenure as Chancellor of New York City Public Schools. And he thought about it, and his response was, I wish we had been bolder for kids. I wish we had been bolder for kids, was what he said. And I promised myself when I became superintendent, I would rise to that challenge. But the reality is no superintendent can do that alone. No school committee can do that alone. That's something that we have to do together. And so at a time when it would be easy to accept the status quo and say things are good enough, at a time when our budgets are tight, it would be easy to delay needed improvements. At a time when we could be satisfied with the success of some kids, but not all kids, I ask you to stand with us to be bold for kids together. So thanks for listening. I'm not sure if we're going to go to break now, but
We're going to go to
Madam Moderator,
break
I'll turn it
now,
back
and
to
then
you.
we'll return at 9.